The Seattle Kraken have almost made it a joke in NHL circles of how they are just really, really good at being mid, and I would really hope, and I'm really cautious of diving into that, because I think that above everything, they still have drafted really well. I do feel like they are going to still have a lot of these sort of B-level players coming out of the pool, but if anything, they kind of remind me a little bit of the Carolina Hurricanes, where the Hurricanes for years have just been this team filled with solid NHL players, but when push comes to shove and in the NHL playoffs, they just can't quite squeeze their way through the best in the league. Now, Seattle's NHL success has been trailing Carolina's pretty significantly, but I just have to be hopeful that with the team that they've built and the guys on the way, that they're going to figure it out and things will take a step in the right direction, because there's a lot of guys on this list that I really like. There's only one name in the core category for me, and that's Berkeley Catton. I love Berkeley Catton to death, and he is a player that I find extremely valuable with just how good of a playmaker he is up the middle of the ice. He's got great skill, great finishing ability, a really good diverse offensive toolkit that I feel like will round out Seattle's roster really well. If not this season, probably, then the year after or something like that. But to me, the real story for this team is the depth category. There's just a lot of really good players in this group, starting with guys like Carson Raykopf, and Yanni Newman touched the NHL this year. I thought he looked okay there as well. Their first round pick from this year, Jake O'Brien. Some people might be a little bit surprised with him in this tier, but I really do believe that there is a good offensive player here that has size and some nice rawness to build around, and he does need to physically develop a little bit, and I do feel like there is a level of certainty that he'll be an NHL player, but I'm just not totally sold on him being a real game-changing offensive player, at least not in the same way and the same style of play as a guy like Berkeley Catton, which is more up my alley. That's not to say he's not very good. A really good pickup for them this year, and I feel like will be a valuable member of this team. Jagger Firkus, I thought, had a pretty good season this year. He's a little small, and I am hoping for another step forward in the AHL. Maybe an NHL call up here and there, but there is a lot of offensive firepower with him that I think is valuable. I feel like Julius Miettinen, while he might not have the huge upside, you could say the same thing about Nathan Villeneuve. I think these types of players should carve their way into the bottom six in some way. I see a little bit of that nasty rat type of player out of a Nathan Villeneuve that could play on your fourth line and muck it up while still being pretty dynamic and skilled and quick, and a lot of things in his game that there are to like. I thought Blake Fiddler was a really good pickup where they got him in the second round. Again, I think there is upside, but the floor is a little bit hit or miss. Some of his bad moments this year were really not great. But overall, I mean, I think there's a few players in here that could do a really good job rounding out Seattle's roster over the next little while. It's just going to be a matter of whose jobs they take, because there's a lot of guys already on the team that are, I would argue, in this depth category. In the maybes category, again, there are some good players here that I really like and hope for the best for, but in a lot of cases, it's just a matter of either betting on a different scenario, making them look better, or just a few question marks about becoming NHL players that withhold them from being in that depth or even core territory. But I really love guys like Oscar Fisker-Mullgaard. He did have a really successful year in the SHL this year. Just a really smart, dynamic 200-foot center that I've loved over the last little while, and I am really excited to see what he can do over the next little while. Ole Josephson might surprise some people here, but I will be very curious to see how he does now that he's gone from Red Deer, because every single time I watched Red Deer this year, I watched and I just saw Josephson zipping around in both ends of the ice, playing the style that I love, and he just didn't get rewarded on the score sheet as much as you might like. But that being said, if you look under the hood, his even strength scoring rates relative to the rest of his team were really strong, and I feel like at the end of the day, Josephson in a better scenario around him might be a really good player. I still have some level of hope for Ty Nelson, but we're really pushing it at this point. I do also want to highlight some other defensemen though. We mentioned this type of player before, but guys like Tyson Jugnoth and Caden Hamill, every time I watched these guys this year, they were so much fun to watch. I was really surprised that they left the Caden Hamill signing right to the very last second, because I think the growth in his game from his draft year to now has been really really strong. You can see why he was the captain of the Silvertips last year. This is a big but really powerful and strong skater that really looks like a very different player from what I remember in his draft year. Tyson Jugnoth has taken a little bit of time, and you have to admit that he was an overage defenseman last year playing in the WHL, but he looked really good with Portland. He was an everyone else player before I started putting this together, but I think he's kind of come a long way since the last couple of seasons, and maybe going back to junior and playing with a more dynamic offensive team has really helped him out. Now that he's making the jump to wherever it is he's playing this year, I'm really excited to see what he can do because I thought he was really, really strong this year. Then I've got a couple of guys in Will Reynolds and Maxim Agafonov who they drafted this past season, and I kind of like them. Will Reynolds is big and skates pretty well, and I guess the NHL teams are betting on that, but I think he's a pretty good example of that. Maxim Agafonov is similar, a really smooth skater, but I feel like he's one of these guys where you might call him poised, but he doesn't really do much. He's just a safe, dependable defenseman who skates pretty well, keeps it super, super simple, almost to a frustrating level, and just has a nonchalant style of play that maybe is a thing, and so in that sense, he's a maybe, if that makes sense. There's a couple of goaltenders in here too, Semyon Vyazovoy and Kim Saarinen, both of whom had pretty solid years last year from what I can gather, and they seem totally fine. And in the everyone else category, there's not a ton here that I really want to get into specifically. I kind of like Zeb Fjorsfjall, but I'm curious about him being an NHL player. I've downgraded Edward Shala down to this tier. I just don't see it with him. He just hasn't really lived up to being a top 20 pick. This was a guy who I had outside my first round, I believe, looking back at my draft rankings, and I just felt like he wasn't really an NHL player. He got off to a ripping hot start in the AHL, and I was wondering how that was possible after watching him directly, and then he cooled off for the rest of the year. Caden Price, again, similar. Ripping hot start to the year, got traded, played a ton of minutes for the Canadian national team at the World Juniors, and they were a very disappointing group, I would say, this year. There's just a lot of downside to Caden Price's game that over the last few years, I just have gotten less and less confident he will sort those issues out and become an NHL player. Similar things, I guess, could be said about Lukas Dragicevic. I thought he played okay with the Prince Albert Raiders this year, but I don't really know about an NHL level defenseman still, and we'll see how the next year goes, but I did downgrade him to this tier. So overall, I'm giving the Seattle Kraken a 2A. I think they have a ton of just really solid talent, almost like their NHL team. I don't know if their NHL team really has that guy, that dude that you put on a pedestal and go, that's our guy for the next 10 years. I think they have some candidates, but they haven't gotten there yet. You could say almost the same thing about their prospect pipeline here. I personally really like Berkeley Catton, but I understand why some are more skeptical. But beyond that, they have a lot of just good hockey players. Carson Rakoff, Jake O'Brien, Jagger Firkus, Julius Vietinen's been pretty good. Clark Caswell, I didn't mention him earlier, but I love Clark Caswell to death. Fisker Molgaard, I've liked Hamill. Ole Josephson is another one. They've got some solid goaltenders. Nicholas Koko had a good season in the AHL last year. There's something here. I just wonder if this is a team where now I would start to pivot and go, okay, we've got all these young players. Who can we sort of maneuver with to add to the NHL team in a way that will be beyond the aggregate of these young guys? Who of these guys can we trade to add that really high-end player in the NHL, which to me is 50% of the point of drafting in the first place. It's so you can fill your NHL holes later, and we'll see where it goes for Seattle. I am still optimistic about the trajectory of this team. If there is another disappointing season from them and things completely get cleaned out and the slate gets reset and they reboot with whatever it is comes next, I really hope that this drafting and development staff and system stays in place because they still do a really good job adding some good players, and I think that trend will continue into the future. So let's see where it goes, but I really like how Seattle has done. They might not be in that top tier of players, I would say, but they do have a lot of good in their system. And with that, we're going to call it. If you liked the video, definitely like and subscribe. If you really liked it, definitely consider a subscription over at Scouching.ca, where you can get access to all kinds of fun data tools and our Discord server and plenty of other fun stuff that you're just not going to find anywhere else on the internet. So check that out at Scouching.ca. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.